life of Methodism and in the life of the American South, except to say that as I was looking across the room at Dr. Lewis a moment ago, I thought about a time when, back when remember when the Interfaith Dialogue Institute was headquartered here in Jackson, and we used to have those annual interfaith dinners. And sometimes we'd have 400 or 500 people. They always met at the Hilton out on County Line Road. I remember one night Governor Winter was the speaker for that event, and I was watching Governor Winter make his way to the podium, and I remember just consciously thinking to myself that there are some people in this world in whom the Holy Spirit and the human spirit are so inextricably interwoven that you cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. And I've thought that about a small handful of people in my life, and Dr. Lewis, you certainly are one of those. So thank you for being that kind of person who calls forth and confirms that which is deepest and best in the rest of us. We draw courage from you. Thank you. Last evening, in the first of this year's Lewis Lectures, we thought together about the way Scripture leans. And we even did a little scientific experiment where if you place a perfectly smooth Bible on a perfectly level table, on a perfectly flat floor, in a perfectly level building, that Bible will still do what, Wilson Stribling? Lean, thank you. We did not even practice that, but this morning, Wilson said, as soon as you started that, I knew where it was going. Yes, place a perfectly smooth Bible on a perfectly level table, on a perfectly flat floor, in a perfectly level building, and that Bible before your eyes while you are standing there watching will still start sloping and tilting and turning and leaning in the direction of whoever is most in need of help and hope. That is the way Scripture leans. The cumulative weight of Scripture, not every verse in the Bible. There are 32,240 of them, and they do not all say the same. But the cumulative weight of Scripture tilts and turns, slopes and leans in the direction of compassion, empathy, and solidarity. Last evening, we followed that leaning side through the Hebrew Bible and much of the New Testament, as well as the holy books of other faiths, Sikhism, Hinduism, Islam, as well as our Jewish and Christian Bible. All of those verses and voices which call us to a life of active faith for persons in need of food, shelter, clothing, welcome, comfort, relief, health care, and healing. And last evening, as you may remember, if you were here, we intentionally worked our way around the four Gospels, saving for this morning what Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John might have to say concerning Jesus and a more just society. Earlier this week, in preparation for our time together this morning, I did again what I try to do every time I am called upon to speak of these matters. And that is that one more time, I read the four Gospels all the way through, every word. Because I was coming to Galloway, I made sure to use my United Methodist Bible with that beautiful, powerful Pentecostal cross and flame symbol on the front cover. Boy, talk about a Baptist want to be a Methodist. And because we are here to think together about a gospel response to healthcare access, while I was reading every word of all four Gospels this week, I marked with a pen one more time every time Jesus healed someone in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which, as you may know from your own life with the Gospels, is 68 times. 68 separate times in the four Gospels, Jesus healed. Sometimes someone, sometimes multiple persons, which even after you do factor in the synoptic redundancies, makes healing the sick a large part of the gospel story. Then, if you add in the times Jesus spoke about our God-given responsibility to those who are experiencing poverty, another 18 times, and then also add in all the times Jesus just sat down with and stood up for those who were marginalized, ostracized, stigmatized, demonized, and dehumanized, another 22 times. And it is clear that the cumulative weight of the Jesus of the four Gospels leans in the same direction as the cumulative weight of all of that scripture we sat with last evening. The cumulative weight of the living Word of God leaning like the cumulative weight of the written Word of God in the direction of empathy for and solidarity with whoever is most in need of help and hope, comfort, and relief. To actually sit down, be still, and prayerfully read the four Gospels all the way through is to see why James Forbes once said, "Nobody gets into heaven without a letter of reference from the poor." And it is to understand why Karl Barth, in his early years as a pastor, said in an Advent sermon on December the 17th of 1911, Jesus is social justice, and social justice is Jesus. To read the four Gospels all the way through, start to finish, word for word, is to see that the Jesus of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John came to embody the love of God for whoever was most in need of help and hope, and to call those who follow him to do the same. Now, yes, of course, it is true that the four Gospels were written a generation or two after Jesus lived. Mark, maybe in the 60s, Matthew and Luke, perhaps in the 70s or 80s, John, probably in the 90s, according to most of the best scholarship that we have. And it is also true that, like the letters of Paul, the four Gospels were written for particular communities of faith, a reality which, yes, in some ways does shape what we see in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And yes, it is also true that the four Gospels we have in our Bibles are only four among the many more Gospels which were circulating in the first century church. These four, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, being the ones the early church chose and kept through that long, ever-evolving process called the canonization of Scripture. So while, yes, all of that is true, and while, yes, it is important to acknowledge that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were not written by people who were following Jesus around, taking notes, the fact remains that the four Gospels are the best look we have at the one who gave us the best look we have at God. And to the extent that the four Gospels are a trustworthy record of the words and works of Jesus, we can know by reading them that Jesus spent his days sitting down with and standing up for those who were most in need of help and hope, and that he called and calls those who would follow him to do the same. This we can say with some confidence, in part because in Matthew 7:12, Jesus is reported to have said that all the law and the prophets can be summed up in a single simple sentence: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And also because in Matthew 22:34 through 40, when asked to say what matters most, Jesus is reported to have said that what matters most is that we love God with all that is in us, and that we love all others as we love ourselves, after which he is reported to have said that all the law and the prophets, which is all the Bible Jesus had, are to be interpreted through the lens of and in the light of that single central standard: love for God and love for others. Love which in the life of the Jesus of the four Gospels was more a brave verb than a nice noun. The kind of brave verb love which is embodied in specific practical human responses to specific practical human needs. Caring for those who are struggling and suffering, visiting those who are in prison, welcoming those who have been marginalized, stigmatized, ostracized, demonized, and dehumanized, working to end food insecurity, responding in active compassion to persons without adequate clothing or shelter, and working for health care access, equity, and justice for all persons. That way of following Jesus is often called the social gospel. It is a beautiful phrase, and I understand why so many dear and good people use it, but I do not, because I do not believe that specific, practical human response to specific, practical human need is the social gospel. I believe it is the gospel. To call loving our neighbor as we wish to be loved the social gospel is to take what Jesus made the central heart of the gospel and turn it into a separate part of the gospel. To call responding to specific human need with specific human action the social gospel is to create a special gospel category for what Jesus said is the central gospel question in Matthew 25:31 through 46. Somewhere along the way, those of us, like myself, for whom this life works reasonably well, made the gospel more about the next life than this life. Perhaps so that we could have a kind of Christianity which would not bother our economics or our politics, making John 3:16 and John 14:6 what matters most, instead of what Jesus said matters most. Matthew 7:12, Matthew 22:34 through 40, and Matthew 25:31 through 46. Creating a sidecar for the main gospel, which we call the social gospel, which includes such things as feeding the hungry, housing the homeless, visiting the prisoner, and doctoring the suffering, as though it was a gospel footnote instead of the gospel headline. all of which allowed us, folk like myself included, to make Jesus less disruptive to our lives by making him more about the next life than about this life. But as the Methodist preacher Peter Story says, whenever we ask Jesus to come into our heart, Jesus always says, only if I can bring my friends. And if you have ever read the four Gospels all the way through, you have some idea of who those friends might be. Jesus, going about from place to place, drawn to whoever was most in need of help and hope like a moth to a flame, sitting down with and standing up for whoever is most voiceless and vulnerable, suffering and struggling, shunned and shamed, overlooked, left out, and alone on the hard margins of life. And if that was a large part of what Jesus did do then, it is a large part of what Jesus would do now. Jesus' friends then would be Jesus' friends now. Who Jesus sat down with and stood up for back then, back there on the page, is exactly who Jesus would sit down with and stand up for now down here on the ground. Which is why, while I cannot speak for you or anyone else, as for me, I don't spend a lot of time wondering where Jesus would stand when it comes to working for a more just society. Do y'all read Richard Rohr? You know how Richard Rohr has that sentence, the mystics know some things? Well, I by no means qualify as a mystic. But like many of you, I have read the four Gospels all the way through enough times that I have gotten down at the center of my soul a little bit of what I call the Jesus gene. It's sort of like a long, slow, gradual version of being born again. You read the four Gospels often enough, prayerfully enough, and you begin to sort of get that old Jesus gene down deep in your soul. And that old Jesus gene gives you a new kind of Jesus screen through which every issue and question passes. It's like a filter or a sieve. I call it that Jesus screen. And everything that comes up just automatically, instinctively has to pass through that Jesus screen. And once that old Jesus gene gives you that new Jesus screen, you kind of begin to walk with a little Jesus lean. You become predictable. And whatever the issue or question, you know which way Jesus is going to lean. You know Jesus is going to lean in the direction of welcome and inclusion, kindness and love, empathy for, and solidarity with whoever is most in need of help and hope, comfort, and relief. I cannot speak for you, but as for me, while I do wonder about many inscrutable mysteries of our faith, and while I know that God is in so many ways beyond our knowing, when it comes to Jesus and the central subject of the Lewis lectures, I don't spend a lot of time wringing my hands and wondering about what Jesus would do if Jesus was here. If Jesus came to Jackson, Jesus would work for a more just society. That is a clarity, not a mystery. Which is why we work for a more just society, not because we've made an ideological decision to be liberal or a political decision to be progressive, but because we've made a spiritual decision to follow Jesus. We have read the four Gospels so prayerfully, so often, for so long. All of us, you do that same thing. I know you do. We've gotten that old Jesus gene in our heart, and it's put a new Jesus screen in our mind, which has left us with a little Jesus lean in our walk. We walk through life leaning with Jesus in the direction of love, the brave verb. Which is why, while I cannot speak for anyone else, as for me, working for a more just society by working to close the health care coverage gap so that all persons who need to see a doctor get to see a doctor. Not unlike working for a more welcoming and inclusive, gentle and just society for all persons who have historically been marginalized, stigmatized, shunned, slighted, excluded, and shamed is not about political correctness or wokeness or virtue signaling or any of the rest of that lexicon of diversion. Rather, to work for a more just society is to lean the way Jesus leans. To lean into and live up to our baptism, which we received in the name of the one who spent his life sitting down with and standing up for whoever was most in need of help and hope, comfort and relief. Which is why I keep saying that closing the health care coverage gap is not a politically partisan red or blue thing, but a clearly moral, right, and true thing. To which some might understandably say, well, that's all well and good, but you know, the devil is in the details. Isn't that true of every great, large, aspirational, life-lifting, world-changing, complex task we have ever undertaken for the common good? Just because the devil is in the details, we don't give up and go home. Rather, we ask the devil to go sit in the next room while we get to work on the intractable details of public policy so we can find a way to do what we know in our heart is right and true, which is to work together for a more just society, which is the way we lean because that is the way Scripture leans, not to mention the way Jesus leans.
Thank you so much. Aren't you glad you came? Now, we are a bit ahead of schedule. So what we will do, it's 9:10 now. We will resume with our next lecture in 10 minutes at 9:20. Okay? So I will see you back in here at 9:20. There are all kinds of groceries and snacks and drinks in the room behind you. We invite you to go get coffee or whatever you would like. Feel free to bring it back into this room to your tables. And I hope you'll meet somebody that you hadn't met yet. If you will return to your seats, we're going to get started in just a moment. If you will return to your seats, please. Thank you.
All right, are we ready? Here we go. I have the joyful honor of introducing our next speaker, Mr. Vaughn Gordon. Vondaris Vaughn Gordon is a native of Morehead, Mississippi in Sunflower County. Vaughn believes in building deep relationships and resilient connections to drive cultural transformation and movement toward belonging and justice for communities, organizations, and individuals. He is the executive director of the Alluvial Collective, and he supports a team committed to ending inequity based on difference by cultivating belonging and wholeness in the world. And I have to interject a personal note that he is my beloved sister's boss. And so I have a very special place in my heart for the Alluvial Collective. Vaughn joined the staff of the former William Winter Institute for Racial Reconciliation, now known as the Alluvial Collective, more than a decade ago to develop and coordinate youth programs. And as a student at the University of Mississippi, Vaughn served as a founding board member of the University of Mississippi Institute for Racial Reconciliation. In community, Vaughn serves on the board of directors of Operation Shoestring and supports the work of the Mississippi Statewide After School Network. He serves on community advisory councils of the University of Mississippi Medical Center, Junior League of Jackson, and the LGBTQ Fund of Mississippi. Nationally, Vaughn is a board member of the Harwood Institute for Public Innovation, a racial healing fellow with the National Compadres Network, and a member of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation's Global Fellows and Community Leadership Networks. And Vaughn and his family reside right here in Jackson, Mississippi, stewards of Choctaw Native land. And we are glad you are here. Welcome, Vaughn.
Check. Mic check. Ooh, I like the way I sound, Susanna. So, someone will tell what I think is a quick joke. My colleagues always remind me that what is funny to me is not always funny to other people. So I just warn you, my sense of humor serves my own sense of joy. So. I watched a speech recently that was given at 16th Street Baptist Church where the 4 young ladies died in the bombing in the 1960s. And the gentleman who I think was representing the president shared a story of giving a speech. And this has been in my pocket for a month because I knew Chuck Poole and Dan Jones were going to be lecturers here. And I know Jason Coker. I still got a little time to catch up with him in speaking. And I knew for Dr. Owens and Dr. Melvin, I didn't have a chance because of their expertise. But he said, you know, he had given a speech once, and this little boy walked up to him after he had finished with $5 in his hand. And he said, Mister, this is for you. I said, oh, well, thank you. I appreciate it. What is this for? He said, well, my daddy said he'd never heard such a poor speaker in all his life. So, you know, following Chuck Poole, I should just put a plate up here and let people bring me fives. If you would, for a moment, pray with me. Thank you, Father. Thank you for blessing us to be here today. The fellowship, the joy, the laughter, the communion, the communing with your spirit and ours will deepen our connections, will make us a stronger community, walking out of here committed to building a stronger community. I thank you, Lord, for all of the blessings you have bestowed upon me, the incredible family you have blessed me with, the roots you gave me that add depth and joy and character to my life. I thank you for the faces in here. I thank you for the friendships in here. And I thank you for Jesus Christ. Amen. Thank you. So I am the executive director of the Alluvial Collective. I think Susanna said enough about that history. And our work is about building community. We use a lot of circles. You know, if I had my way, there wouldn't be any tables in here. We would do a lot we'd have a lot of conversation with each other. My colleagues and I, for a long time, have said we will go anywhere and work. A boardroom, a classroom, schoolhouse, outhouse, like you name it. If there are people there and we can deepen the connections between them, we will go. Because we believe that that's the fundamental building block of how you build community, despite and across difference. There's a part of what I'm going to share today, it's going to feel pretty intellectual, academic-y stuff. And I know that there are people in here smarter than me who might understand some of it better than me. And I'm going to give them a little bit of room at the end if they want to ask questions or chime in, because I think that's one of the ways we thrive as a community. We make space for each other's voices to sharpen us. Sacredness. Sacredness is a really, really interesting thing to me. One of the things Susanna mentioned in my biography is my being part of the National Compadres Network's racial healing practitioners. And in that space, there are lots of people who come from Native communities with roots much deeper than any root I am familiar with. And they talk a lot about the interconnectedness we have, our interdependence, and the sacredness of all living things. When you look up sacred, the most impactful definition to me is where it says to be sacred is to be worthy of protection. To be worthy of protection. God created us as sacred beings. Dr. Miles Monroe, in his book, Understanding the Purpose and Power of Men, talks about how we are created as spirit. We are in relationship with God in spirit. Our bodies, they are created for an earthly purpose, right? Donald Lawrence, the gospel singer, says we are spiritual beings living a natural experience. So I want you to imagine everything I say today, the power of it, the necessity of connection being at the spiritual level, because that is where I think we are most sacred. Now, the bodies that come with that sacred spirit, well, there's an emotional state, there's a mental state, there's a physical state, and our health and our ability to care for our health encompasses all of it. I cannot care for your body but have no regard for your spirit, for your mind. It's just not possible. So what I want to challenge the larger community to do is to expand how we think about health and sacredness. It is not enough to provide access to one part of care. I think the challenge for us in building a common good is to think holistically about ourselves and about the others in our community. That's the most important thing for me here. Vision care, dental care, access to therapists and psychiatrists and psychologists, they all go together to me. So at the policy level, a policy is insufficient to me if it does not encompass all of those. I think our responsibility in honoring the sacredness of the people we are in community with, even if they aren't the people who eat the same pie that I do. Dr. Michelle Owens and I, there's a rift between us about mayonnaise. I hate it. She has a bit of an affinity for it. But in our community, I think her and everybody else who eats mayo should have the benefit of all of that care. Because all of them, maybe their taste buds aren't sacred, but everything else about them is sacred. So in alluvial form, I want to ask you to do me a favor. Somebody's beside you. I'd like you to I'm going to take 2 minutes of my time, and I'm going to give you and the person you identify 60 seconds each. And I'd like you to tell each other the story of when in your life you felt most sacred. Where were you? Who was there? What were you going through? When you felt most sacred. Now, I know we've got some preachers and pastors and teachers in the room. My colleagues often say that we should always remind people when it comes to stories that stories have beginnings, middles, and ends. So think about your 60 seconds in terms of beginning, middle, and end. We don't want to get to a minute and you go, and now to tell you what happened. We don't want to do that. So would you indulge me? Identify your partner, and even if it's somebody, even if you're here with your partner, with your spouse, I doubt they've ever heard this story from you. So let's identify a person and go.
We're just taking a break?
Exchanging a story.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
All right, I was worried, I said, oh no.
We're working on our last 30 seconds. All right. I'm sure at least one of the people in your pair got through the middle. Thank you. Thank you. People's stories are some of the most, when they share their stories with you, it's one of the most intimate parts of them that they can share. So we're always respectful of the stories that people tell us. And in our work, and we believe in healthy communities, we don't tell other people's stories. Their stories are for them to tell. But there are things you can learn from their story. I'd love to get a couple of people, if you don't mind, to volunteer. One of the things that you shared in your stories, what did you have in common? And I know you don't have a mic. For the people in the virtual space, bear with us. Who would care to share just a little bit of what you had in common, or your stories had in common, or what stuck out to you? Immense vulnerability. Thank you. Thank you. Others? Usefulness. Usefulness in the connection, in the sacredness. Gotcha. One other. Yes.
Spiritual commitment.
Ooh. If I weren't on this timer, let me tell you. Whew. We're going to stop there because I'm easily distracted. So, we're all, yes, sir, yes, sir. Ooh. I have a daughter at Murrah, so I'm going to come see you when this is over. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Wow. Be careful what you ask for. We share a sacredness. So what gets in the way of that sacredness? What gets in the way of our ability to share that humanity with each other and to show the kind of care, the depth of care and compassion for each other that will yield a greater sense of common good, where our policy, our politics the institutions that serve us will reflect that connection. What are some of the things that get in the way of it? I wish I could tell you that the time I'm spending with you this morning is about the sacredness alone. But I think we have learned some lessons about our work, through our work, and in other spaces. Frankly, as a 43-year-old black man in America, I have had to study how this society operates for survival. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the ways that we are fractured, the frameworks that we sometimes use and operationalize that makes it hard for us to get to the ideal. James Baldwin wrote a long time ago, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." One of the tools that my colleagues and I use to do that, I'm not going to read through all of these, but I want to, it's easier said than done to create the spaces where that sacredness is seen and felt and experienced. I feel like I'd be disrespecting you in the work that we've done for years if I didn't just share a tool that we use. And I want you to keep it in mind as a part of the how for the work that we have to do when we leave here. We use these guideposts as a way of keeping community. Race, religion, politics, those are the things that people tell you don't want to talk about. We accepted an invitation to talk about all three. So I gotta bring these to the fore. We use these 9 guideposts, and when we have people in space together and they are anticipating the difficulty of conversations, it's really important that we get a shared agreement about these. I will say at the outset, before even going through them, that if you have a relationship, a close relationship with somebody, any one of these has the potential to create great improvement in that relationship if you honor it. If you take them all together, it becomes completely transformative of that relationship. But it's to be present and welcoming. Show up and welcome. Listen deeply to learn. No fixing. We don't fix. My colleague Jackie Berry Martin says, situations get fixed, people don't. Suspend judgment and assumptions and seek understanding. It is much more about the disposition than your ability to actually do it. Speak your truth and respect the truth of others. Maintain confidentiality. That is about integrity. As with the stories, when people share really intimate part of themselves, do you honor that? Respect silence. There are some soft-spoken people in this room. They don't talk all the time, but when they do speak, you can count on it being substantive. I'm sure you all know people who, in a one-on-one conversation, if there's a little bit of silence, you can see panic all over their faces. They gotta hurry up and fill that empty space with words. That's often a curse, not a blessing. When things get difficult, turn to wonder. That's all about engaging your empathetic senses rather than your judgmental senses, right? Judgmental senses, at least for me growing up, was once I made a judgment, I felt like I needed to do something about it. And most of the fights I got in were probably because of that. And the last is to trust the circle. That is about community and connection. Together, when we're connected, trust the process. Trust the good intentions of people in the space. For the work that we have to do, we've got to be able to trust each other. We've got to be able to see value in each other. So we want to trust the circle. First Corinthians. I planted the seed, Apollos watered, but God has been making it grow. So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who makes things grow. The one who plants and the one who waters have one purpose, and they will each be rewarded according to their own labor. For we are co-workers in God's service. You are God's field, God's building. From the moment we started talking about this lecture series and its topic, it was really, really easy to feel the immense pressure of it. One of the great blessings of doing this in partnership with Galloway is that this is a space of believers. And where the believers are, the Lord is working. We don't have the burden of creating it all. We're not in a workspace where the horn blows in the morning and they say you got 700 widgets to make before the horn blows again. Get at it. This is hard work, but we are not doing it alone. Sometimes we are planting seeds. I said to the good Reverend last night, as after he closed, I said, you should go back and get the mic and tell everybody to bring a skeptic with them. Bring somebody who's not committed. That's important. The guidepost I put up, they'll show up at Thanksgiving. You know when the weirdo of the family is at the table? The sibling who y'all drank the same water growing up, but something happened to them. They just don't see the world like you do. That's where the guideposts are useful. We need the Lord's guidance in those spaces. We need strong bonds of connection between us to support us in building community with those people, the skeptics, those who will fall in some other areas that I'll describe in a little while. This is a long one, but this is important for the sacredness. If anyone who raise your hand if you see yourself as sacred? Okay, all right, good. That's like 75% of the room. For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. For in one spirit we are all baptized into one body, Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, and all were made to drink of one spirit. For the body does not consist of one member, but of many. If the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, that would not make any less a part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would be the sense of hearing? If the whole body were an ear, where would be the sense of smell? But as it is, God arranged the members in the body, each one of them as he chose. If all were a single member, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, yet one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. On the contrary, the parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And on those parts of the body that we think less honorable, we bestow the greater honor. And our unrepresentable parts are treated with greater modesty, which our more presentable parts do not require. But God has so composed the body, giving greater honor to the part that lacked it, that there may be no division in the body, but that the members may have the same care for one another. If one member suffers, all suffer together. If one member is honored, all rejoice together. Now you are the body of Christ and individually members of it. We are sacred, not just you. If we don't take any other message to the skeptic, that's the one. Their bodies are sacred, everybody's is. The public policy decisions we make need to reflect that for the Christian. Anything else to me is unacceptable. Talk a little bit about how people rationalize it, but we should have clarity about it as we leave this space. I'm a Howard Thurman fan. And Howard Thurman, he says, nothing is foreign. Parts relate to the whole. One all-extending, all-preserving soul connects each being, greatest with the least. Made beast in aid of man and man of beast. Shout out to my native friends. All served, all serving. Nothing stands alone. The chain holds on, and where it ends, unknown. And then this, no man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manner of thy friends or of thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never assume to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. The working definition of community, Howard Thurman says, is the experience of wholeness, of completeness, of inner to governance, of integration. And wherever this is experienced, at whatever level of life, at that particular level, there is community. The individual human being experiences in his organism this definition of community, as if the organism, all the parts, had committed to memory a sense of the whole, a social sense, which is the overtone of the biological inner community. Now, that's a mystic for you. Those are such powerful words to me. It's weird. Like years ago when I first read it, it was weird to read. But every time I read it, I feel like it gets more clear to me. This is the message we have to convey. But who is the we? Where does the community break down? This little bright thing here, I first think I loved it because it was so colorful. Like sometimes I just want to walk in a room and put it on the screen and leave it and just sit there, like saying Jesus wept for the whole speech. We don't often think about ourselves as occupying space in all of these identity categories. There are ways that we identify in each, if we think about it. Some we don't spend much time thinking about at all, right? On the outer ring, we tend to think of those, the social sciences and work like ours, we think of those as the things you can do something to change. You don't have to be a Christian, We can change our appearance, right? Income. Boy, sometimes we pray hard for a change, don't we? The role, your organizational role. Incredible leaders in here. Family. Yeah, you were born with one, but you ain't got to hang out with them. This center right here, the strongest argument to be made is that there's a way you are identified at birth in each of these categories, right? And as you get older, in almost every case, you may continue to identify that way. Age, though, I don't care what you do, you're not going to change it. You can change the way age looks on you, but you can't change the age. And I'll tell you, this race one, there have been times in my life where, it's dark and I see the blue lights behind me, and I start reaching back looking for the zipper so I can take the black skin off. Never found it. Never found it. Can't change it. Can't change it if I wanted to. Sexual orientation, I don't care how hard you look, you're not going to see it. Physical, mental ability. When we think about health care, yes, some things we can see, but there are others that we can't. I always honor people who battle depression and anxiety because it is, oftentimes they do it in isolation because we can't see it. But for each of these, there's a way that you identify. There's a way that you see yourself, right? But there's also a way that others see you. There's a famous rap lyric, which is probably not the best thing to mention in this space. Reverend Poole did it, you were really lyrical, but not quite hip hop. There's supposedly this quote of O.J. Simpson saying, "I'm not black, I'm O.J." To which the artist responds, "Okay." You can see yourself, you can identify one way, but if you are identified differently, there's a tension there. What happens when the people who see you one way have more power than you? In many areas of our lives, the tensions we experience are there because we see ourselves one way, and the people with power over our lives see us differently. Think about that. You ever argue with your parent, "I am this"? That can be a traumatizing story. I'm not going to stick with that. A funny thing happens with these. I may need Susanna to be my timekeeper on this because I can get lost in this. Social psychologists, organizational leaders even talk about how our biases form. How our biases form. There's an interesting question that we would ask in implicit bias exercises. I'll ask you to roll with me here. I want you to try to think of one thing you believe about people of a different racial group than you. One thing you believe that you know is probably not true. Maybe I'll give you take 20 years, go back 20 years and try to remember a thing that you believed about people of a different racial group than you that you know was probably not true. And normally I would ask people to raise their hand when they think of it, but I'm not going to put y'all in that position. Because whatever the example is, what it illustrates is the cognitive dissonance we can have. You believe it, but you know it's probably not true. That's dangerous, right? It's dangerous if you have power that you apply based on that thing. They say that there are these two dimensions that our biases form around. One is warmth, which you can also read as competence. Oh, I'm sorry, intention. Warmth is like intention. For those of you who don't know me, I walk in the room and I walk up to you. What's the first part of me you notice? You could say my suit. But generally, what you look at first is the face, right? Eyes signal intentions, don't they? They signal warmth, or they can signal bad intentions. No warmth. Once I've made an assessment about your intentions toward me, what's the next thing I want to figure out? Everything in me wants to call on Doug Boone in the back, but that wouldn't be fair. What's the second thing we want to assess after we have gauged intentions? This is going to become really intuitive. It's one thing to see what your intentions are towards me. A baby crying at me, I can take offense to it, right? But if it can't even roll over on its stomach, I'm not threatened by it. The second dimension is competence. What is your ability to act on your intentions? Our limbic system, our reptilian brain. This is how we process threats. This is how we begin to organize the things in our lives. When we think about our families and our raisings, like we all love the people who raise us generally. I have deep affinity for mine, but I know everybody didn't have the same experience. Those of you who have children, grandparents with grandchildren, you start telling them early about intentions and warmth. The people, maybe it's a neighbor. You tell them, you got to kind of watch them. I'm not sure I want you hanging out over there. If you have daughters like I do, and some snotty-nosed boy starts, I don't want to talk about that. Anyway, you start to give them information about how to see, how to gauge warmth or intentions, right? You don't want them to experience it all. Like you don't want them to have to buy all of that sense. You much rather loan them some. So we start to describe the intentions of this person or these people, that group, that community. And then we set out to tell them about their capacity to act on those intentions. My favorite example with my daughters is the van on the corner that's running with the tinted windows and the hand sticking out with the popsicle. Right? You tell your kids when you see that, don't think it means you well. And it's running. There's air in the tires. It can do you harm. Very young in our lives, people who love us, in the interest of protecting us and building our ability to survive, they start to tell us that everybody's not like us. And with that information, they start to build a hierarchy of value to us. The people up here, where we pick up all the warmth, like this is grandma for most people. You feel incredibly warm about her, you know her intentions are good, and she's good at everything she does. Shout out to all the grandmothers. She's skilled. Well, there are also people who fit down here. We don't perceive them with warmth. We don't think they necessarily have good intentions, and we don't see them as all that competent. The social researchers, the researchers who've done most of this work all over the country, this reflects really Western culture, but they talk about at that point where low warmth and low competence meet, they describe people, they give the example of dehumanizing. They talk about dehumanizing. Homeless people, people experiencing homelessness rather, standing at the corner with the sign. You've probably been in the car with somebody who pull up to that stop sign and won't even make eye contact with them. That's dehumanizing behavior. But it's evidence that they don't particularly see warmth or good intentions and don't necessarily see them as all that competent. And when you take those two to the extreme where they meet, we're better off with them invisible. Now, aren't there people that our healthcare system, our healthcare decisions treat as if they are invisible? When you advocate for supporting their care, people start to talk about their competence or their utility. We sometimes fall into the trap advocating because we want to describe people in the most competent terms as possible. We don't talk about sacredness. We talk about employability. Be careful what you subscribe to, even in the interest of doing good, right? The road to Mayo Land is paved with good intention. This is where our tribe is. The people we love, we care about, we see as very competent, we see as with warm intentions, certainly good intentions towards us. That's us. It's us, whoever the us is for you, right? Well, for us, we do everything we can to help. Everything we can. But for those people who we don't see like us, harm. Sometimes it's harm by commission, sometimes it's harm by omission. This is what it looks like for brands. And I'm actually closer to closing than I thought. This is one of my favorite. So people driving Rolls Royces, or as brands, Rolls Royce are considered ability, like competence, great. The lack of warmth or intentions generally revolves around the fact that they aren't affordable, right? So there's a question they ask respondents about Rolls Royces. They say, if you see someone on the side of the road with a disabled Rolls Royce, say they're leaning up against it, would you stop to help? How many people would stop to help? Lord have mercy. I'm in the house of the Lord, and I ain't gotten a hand yet. So why is that? The assumption is, what do you say to yourself? Somebody's on the way. You good. Somebody's got them covered. These decisions are not just about simple bias. They are about the use of resources. It costs you something to stop. That's a commitment. You don't know what's good. You don't know what's wrong. You might have to take them home. And are they going to be offended that you got 3 Starbucks cups in your floorboard? You don't want to subject yourself to that judgment. Somebody's on the way. I know we have some veterans in the room. The VA is viewed as wonderful in terms of intentions, the best of intentions. But if you were in a car accident, generally you don't say, take me to the VA. You want to go where Dan Jones is, right? Because VA's had a lot of challenges over the years, and it's affected the perception of competence. These are the animals. So look, the ones that we eat, low warmth, low intentions, low competence. The ones that we fear, they're competent. These are the ones we make pets of. Does it make sense? Great intentions and they're competent. That's Spot, right? Or if you're Jennifer, it's Oliver. I could just skip the slide, right? You get the point. Where do you put them? The Sikhs are up there, the Muslims are up there, the Jews are up there. The cross with the flame, where do they go? Where would you put them? We're not going to do this exercise because I don't want to get run up out of here. But I want you to think about this framing. These are the ways we make decisions about people in groups. And we do it at the policy level. You listen to the dialogue of any committee in Congress. Well, I don't even know if our legislature has committee meetings anymore. It's certainly not hearings about much. But anyway, when you listen to the conversations, what you hear is people's judgments, what their biases are, and those biases tend to revolve around their judgments around this wheel. We love the people who identify like us. For every one of these categories in the way of identifying, there is either a privilege assigned to it or a burden. And sometimes that burden is a result of policy decisions and the things we believe about ourselves versus what we believe about others. So here, this is a quote from John Powell, who I think of as an amazing scholar and community builder. He is talking about race and politics and class and all of it. So I share that as a disclaimer because I'm going to essentially close with it. The Western self, especially the American self, is particularly isolated and separate. This conception of self has a history, a large part of which is its construction in conjunction with the ideals that assert a radical individualism. Rationality, objectivity, private property, market capitalism, and race. At the core of the American dream of liberty and opportunity for all, of pure meritocracy, but also of exclusion and domination. The liberal worldview, however, is based on the same isolated and autonomous self as conservatism, especially in its dogmatic adherence to secularism, rationality, and a strict separation of church and state. This white self he's talking about white supremacy. This white self is all too easily controlled by fears, in part because it was born of fear, whether of declining property values, the predatory, in quotes, black man, the other's culture of poverty, or any of a range of similar racialized images. Beyond these distortions, however, lies a more fundamental fear, self-annihilation. To ask people to give up whiteness is to ask them to give up their sense of self. We cannot expect people to expose themselves to ontological death or worse. Instead, we must provide space, institutional space, political space, social space, and conceptual space for the emergence of new relationships and a new way of being that exists beyond isolation and separation. That's a cold, hard truth. You can't look at the data that Dr. Melvin put on display and the disparities around a myriad of health outcomes and not see the impact of race and fear in the allocation of resources. We see it in our education system. I have friends who argue that black women and their maternal health, they were better off enslaved. those outcomes than they are now because of the economic interest of their well-being. These are the cold, hard truths that we must demand be confronted. And I'll close with the reason why I know we can confront them. Because we have the mandate. We have the knowledge of our own sacredness. We have the imperative of our shared sacredness. We have a God who, as my grandmother used to say, sits on high and looks low in spiritual communion with us. We have to tell the truth. We have to put the truth on display. But we also have to create the spaces where the guideposts are there that allow people to unpack and we build something new together. Sometimes you have to speak the truth, even if your voice trembles. Wise woman said that. That's a part of what we have to do. But I also think we have to do it in a way that says to those who perpetuate the problematic, whether it's the hierarchy of human value or zero-sum thinking, that in order for one to get, someone else must lose. There is an alternative to that. In order for us to do that, we have to create the spaces where we see even the people who perpetuate those things as sacred too. No one in our community is expendable. Everybody's connected. John Powell says sometimes we have to build short bridges. The cousin you're thinking about when you saw the guidepost, the one who is always out there, maybe you should work on building a relationship with their spouse as a way of eventually getting to them. I'm here for it. And I am incredibly grateful to the God I serve that I'm here for it with you. Thank you all.
Friends, I invite us to gather back to our seats. You always hate to break up good holy fellowship. But we're going to begin. So I invite you to find your way to your seat so that I can introduce Dr. Coker. Great. Thank you. Thank you. All right. For over 20 years, Dr. K. Jason Coker has been a dynamic leader in the religious and nonprofit sector. Best known as an engaging speaker, I can attest to this because I spent all day Thursday with him. A thoughtful leader and a social entrepreneur. Dr. Coker has committed the best part of his professional life to alleviating persistent rural poverty in America. He serves as the president of Together for Hope, a rural development coalition headquartered in Jackson, Mississippi. Coker is building a nationwide coalition of nonprofits in the 338 counties of persistent rural poverty. This coalition uses asset-based community development to create socioeconomic transformation across rural America by focusing on education, health and nutrition, housing and environment, and social enterprise. Together for Hope's Priorities of Hope. The interventions, innovations, and advocacy positions that Coker leads provide a holistic approach to poverty relief and community development in rural America. He holds a Master of Arts in Religion from Yale University Divinity School and a PhD from Drew University Theological School. Dr. Coker's passion for fighting poverty comes from growing up in the grinding poverty of the Mississippi Delta. He is the author of 2 books, James in Post-Colonial Perspective, The Letter as Nativist Discourse, and Faded Flowers, Preaching in the Aftermath of Suicide. He is in addition the co-editor of the Bible and Theory, Essays in Biblical Interpretation in honor of Stephen D. Moore. And Jason is currently writing a new book, The Corporation of God, a Biblical Critique of Global Capitalism, which sounds fabulous. Besides his books, he is the author of dozens of academic articles and book chapters, as well as numerous popular blog posts, baptistnews.com. You can go check it out there. In addition to writing, Dr. Coker and his work with Together for Hope will be the subject of an upcoming documentary, Hope Arising. Welcome, Jason. We're so glad to have you.
I'm not brave enough to step off the edge of that platform. Thank you so much. It is an honor. I'm very humbled just to be a part of this weekend with such incredible speakers and just the depth of intellect and the breadth of heart of the speakers this weekend. It is an honor. So, Carrie and Susanna, thank you so much for all that you've done to make this possible. It's been a lot of fun to be a part of the emails, which feel like forever. And also for Vaughn, when I don't even know how we ended up being a part of it, but Vaughn, thank you for the directions you helped shape what this weekend looks like. Dr. Lewis, thank you for your life and legacy. From Drew University to here in Jackson and what you mean to this city and this church. And to Galloway Memorial, you're well known. And I'm grateful for who you are as a congregation and how you exist to be not just a participant in, but active agents for the kingdom of God in Jackson, Mississippi. So I talk a lot about who we are and what we do quite a bit. And I've done that so much over the past 7 years, I'm almost tired of it, to be honest with you. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're up against as it relates to a just society. And my question for you, and it's a real question, do we live in a just society? So let's take a look at that. So hope is a four-letter word. I'm going to start with some stories that are, you tell me what you think of them. We started working in Sidon a couple of years ago. Raise your hand high if you know where Sidon, Mississippi is. Locals call it Sidon. Yeah. So this is just south of Greenwood. This is the mayor of Sidon, Mayor Johnny Neal. We did an incredible asset mapping exercise in that small town. But when we started getting to know Mayor Neal and doing work in Sidon, we just said, hey, what do you think you need for your town? How could we participate? And she took me to a woman's home. She said, listen, there are 2 homes with 2 senior adults who live there. All right, let's see if this works. There we go. We need to repair their homes. So if hope is a 4-letter word, life is too. And so we went into this woman's home, senior adult. She was bound to a wheelchair. The backside of her house, the roof had collapsed, and it was raining in that part of her house, so they just closed it off, shut the door. There was no wheelchair ramp for her house. And when we walked in, I say this not to bring indignity to this woman, but talk about the indignity of poverty. As soon as we walked in the door, we were hit with such a pungent smell. It was hard. And I walked to the woman. I squatted down and was holding her hands. Her fingernails were very long. You might understand some of that situation. And as when I squatted down and started talking to her beside her, the smell only became worse. And that's when I realized she was incontinent. And I was standing in her urine in the one room that she had. And she told me years ago, before her husband died, they were both worked, and he bought her a tree from a park store in Greenwood, and he planted her a tree, and that tree had grown, and every March, which was her birthday, the tree would bloom. It was one of those Japanese magnolia trees, or tulip trees, I think we call them. She said he'd go out there and pick me a flower and bring me a flower in the room until he passed away. And when he passed away, I thought it would be okay if he would let me go pick my own flower. But I haven't been able to get me a flower in a couple of years. So, I was like, when March gets here, I'm getting you a flower. I'm making a trip to Sidon, right? Well, she didn't make it. She didn't make it to March. So the question is, where is the hope there? Oh, come on, please work. We're going to get there, I think. Maybe not. It'll be a worse presentation without the slides. There we go. So same town, years later, we're going to talk about hope as a 4-letter word in a completely different environment. We started doing these asset mapping exercises. It's instead of going into a community like that and say, what do you need? We go in and say, what do you have? It's a completely different conversation, and the community starts listing out all the things that they have, and within 15 minutes, they feel better about themselves. It generates hope for people who live in communities of persistent rural poverty to acknowledge and write down and state the truth of all the things that they have. And there are incredible assets in rural America. And so when we asked at the very beginning, it was kind of like this. We said, what are your dreams for Sidon? And the 10-year-old boy just shot his hand up immediately. And we said, I was like, okay, what is your dream for Sidon? You were talking about 300 people in the middle of a cotton field. And he goes, I want a mall. And I was struck to my core because we were in the same town that had the house, that had the woman. Same town. So yes, there, you wonder where the hope is. There is hope there because there are people there. And that is where our hope comes from. No getting around it. So let's see it. There he is right there. That's the guy. He's writing down the assets for his town. Kendris Krigler. I told him, I said, son, I'm going to tell this story every time I get a chance across the country. That's where our hope is. So it's always this question, life is a four-letter word, but so is hope. And you can get in the same town, you can get absolute hopelessness, and then an entire cache of hope, all in the same place. And the question for us is, what are we going to look at? Which one are we going to use? Which is going to be the best strategy for moving forward? All right. Come on. There we go. Wendell Berry talks about hopelessness as silence. So when you don't hear anything, there's two parts of that. There's the hope, there's the silence that is complicity in the power, and then there is silence that is hopelessness. And I grew up a lot in that. My family would always say, what can you do? Can't get blood out of a turnip. I don't know how many times I heard that in my life. It was just like an acquiescence to what is, and that is hopelessness. There's nothing we can do about it. Hope is resistance. To have hope means that you think there's a better way to do it, and there's an actual path to that better way. And maybe the path itself is the better way. Hope is resistance. Oh, gosh. And it means we can do something about it, right? From what can we do about it to we can do something about it. So what can we do? I hear this all the time. I talk all over the country, and people give me a hard time about fighting poverty as if there's nothing we can do about it. So I was about to speak in a big church in Dallas, Texas one Sunday. We were in a small group praying before worship where I was preaching. And the pastor of that church goes, Jason he tells everybody, Jason fights poverty. How's that going, Jason? I get that all the time. The only thing worse than that is people coming up to me after church going, well, Jesus said... Oh my gosh! If I wasn't raised as good as I was, it'd be bad. It'd be bad Sundays. What can we do? What can we do about the poverty that we face in America every day? What can we do about a system that creates the poverty we have every day? All right. Oh gosh, know the facts. Know the facts. My presentation's going to betray me. Know the facts. And so much of hope is transitioning. It's not just working in communities of poverty, helping those communities reframe the way they understand their community in terms of what they have instead of what they need. But the other part of knowing the facts is the narrative of poverty that we have in the United States of America. Why are people living in poverty in America? Is there just one answer to that? And the question is, what is the truth versus the narrative that we tell ourselves about poverty? So this is from the U.S. Census. What is poverty? Household size, here we go. One person making $12,784 a year. 725 is also Mississippi's minimum wage. So if you make 85% of minimum wage, you were living at the poverty level. So if you made 100% of minimum wage, you would not technically be living in poverty. Like, get your head around that. And the working poor line is 2 times the poverty line. So we'll get to that in a little bit. Okay, 2 people. Two people making $16,247. Full-time job at $7.81 an hour. All right, very funny story. I went to Yale Divinity School, came straight out of the Mississippi Delta, landed in Connecticut. Oh, man, I'd never seen anything like that in my life. So much money. I got a work-study job at the library, making $7.25 an hour, which was the Connecticut minimum wage in 1998, that long ago, the last millennia. I think in Mississippi it's $4.40 an hour. So I made $7.25 an hour. I ran back to my apartment to pick up the phone and call my mom. And I said, Mom, I'm making $7.25 an hour. And she goes, I've never made that much money in my life. And I go, I know. So the next day, the refectory where we had lunch, it was like tables like this, these round tables. We all get together, we sat around that table, and this woman who had a master's from Harvard, she was getting her second Ivy League master's degree, was at the table. No offense for all of you who have 2 master's degrees from Ivy League school. But she was sitting there, and she goes, can you believe how much they're paying us for these work-study jobs? And I go, no, it's crazy. It's crazy. And she goes, how do they expect us to live on $7.25 an hour? And I was like, right? Hilarious. So I think about that all the time. Now that all these years later, we're at $7.25 as a nation and as a state. All right, so that's a poverty line for 2 people. This is the poverty line for 3 people. So we're talking about parents with a child here, working parents with a child, making less than $20,000 a year. If you make $20,000 a year, if you make $15 more than that, you are not living below the poverty line. So you're not technically poor in America. You're working poor. 2 children, 2 people, 2 children. Come on, let's get to 4. Oh, come on. There we go. Watch out. We're in the big money now, right? This is families of 4. It's kind of your standard American family, two full-time workers, 2 part-time, or 2 children, I should say. Sorry, I was talking about my family. That's what that looks like. 5, put another kid in there. $30,000 for a family of 5 is the federal poverty line, according to the U.S. Census. If you are making $31,000 and you have 3 kids and a spouse, who's both of you full-time working, you're not living in poverty, but how are you living in the United States? How are you living in Mississippi? So that's what we're talking, that is how we define poverty in the United States of America. Is that a just society? Here's an immoral phrase. There's a couple of phrases that I've just come to that I think is immoral. That is an immoral phrase. If you work in America, you should not be poor in America. There should be no such thing as the working poor. If you work, and we're such a country that talks about jobs and working, and if you work hard, you can make it. If you work in this country, you shouldn't be poor. And the only reason there's a such thing as the working poor is because of the way we've designed our system. And if that's an immoral phrase, do we live in a just society? Yeah, I just said that. So let's raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour so that if you make $15 an hour as an individual, you can bring home $31,000. And you and your spouse can bring home $62,000 a year, and then you were high on the hog. I mean, just think about that. There was a managed care organization trying to get the bid on the Medicaid exchange here in Mississippi this past couple of years. And in that process, they basically said, okay, this is the average cost of living. This is how much an average apartment costs. This is how much average everything. They put it all together. And for all what economists say we should make based on those percentages from our income, the hourly wage in Mississippi should be $18.39 an hour based on the costs of Mississippi, the poorest state in the nation. What's the barriers to 1839? So we're up against it. So let's talk about economic inequality. This video is from Stanford University Center on Inequality and Poverty. You can go online there. They have an American Poverty course that's worth taking. It's free. You can do it in your spare time. But you're about to see a graph of economic inequality in the United States of America. And I wish I could ask you to write what you think that graph looks like before you see the reality of it. But here we go.
People we hang out with. It's useful then to lead off our course with a simple device for showing how much inequality there really is. We'll be doing so with the Inequality Parade, first introduced by the Dutch economist Jan Pen. This is a simulated parade in which every household in the US is represented by a person, with every person walking by in the order of their household's income. We've set it up with the low-income households coming first and the high-income households following. And here's how we'll represent inequality. The heights in the parade will be proportional to what the household makes. So those households making average income will be of average height. Those households making twice average income will be twice average height, and so on and so forth. We'll be presenting total household income from the 2012 Current Population Survey. For top incomes, we'll draw on data from the Internal Revenue Service as presented in the World Top Incomes database. Because we want to get a quick sense of the full economy, let's suppose that all the households parade by the reviewing stand in a mere hour. But thanks to the miracle of fast forward, we'll actually get through the parade in just a few minutes.
So here we go. As the parade begins, the marchers are of course very short. But here's what's surprising. They just keep on coming on and on. It quickly becomes clear that we're running a high poverty economy here. The first marker of interest is the marker for extreme poverty. So let's move to that marker now. By extreme poverty, we mean families living on $2 per person per day, which is the classic definition used to characterize poverty in less developed countries. Although some people think we only find such extreme poverty in Latin America, in Asia, in Africa. In fact, Luke Schaefer and Kathy Eden have recently shown that that's not the case, that we find extreme poverty of that sort right here in the US. And indeed, our simulation took a full minute and a half just to get to the marker for extreme poverty. I should mention that we've used here the threshold for extreme poverty for a household of 4, which equals an annual income of about $2,900. To be sure, not all of our households beneath this particular threshold are in extreme poverty because some of them have fewer than 4 household members. But it's nonetheless a pretty useful benchmark of dire circumstances.
Okay, we're just going too slow. It's a really big country, so let's get the parade moving again. I'll fast forward to the next marker for deep poverty, a term that social scientists use to refer to incomes at half the official poverty measure. We'll stop the parade at the income threshold for deep poverty. This translates into about an annual income of $11,700 for a family of 4. It took us a full 5.5 minutes to get here. That's a lot of families in pretty dire economic circumstances. Again, you should bear in mind that this is the threshold for a family of 4. Many of the households who've passed the reviewing stand have fewer than 4 members and therefore may not be in deep poverty.
Really nice job, but now you're slowing us down. We haven't even gotten to the official poverty line yet. And that's indeed our next stop, but we have a way to go. It's again hard not to be struck by the sheer amount of poverty in the US. In fact, because there's just so much poverty in the US, I'm going to have to fast forward to the threshold for a family of 4, which is about $23,500.
It's almost a quarter of the population.
So here we are. The adults in official poverty are typically working very hard, sometimes even in 2 or more jobs. But even so, they're not getting as many hours as they'd like, and moreover, often they're working in minimum wage jobs, and that translates into poverty.
Let's start the parade moving again. We're finally moving out of the land of poverty and into the middle class. Because the middle class in the US is still large, albeit gradually shrinking, The heights are increasing only slowly now. So let's next fast forward to the time point at which half of the marchers have passed by. Now, if half the marchers have passed by, they should finally be nearing my height, 5'11", which is only slightly above average. But as you see here, they're only 4 feet tall. Why? Because the income distribution is right skewed,
This is half
which means
America.
that more of the income goes to the rich and there's less for the rest of us. That's why our marchers are still short, even at the midpoint of the parade.
It's time to move on. I'd like to get to people of Lindsay stature. So let's fast forward now to the top 10% of household incomes, where it gets pretty exciting. As you see, it's only in these final minutes, when people with income in the top 10% arrive, that the heights start accelerating really quickly. From this point on, we're going to start using the world top incomes data because it better captures what's happening at the top. At the 90th percentile, households are making about $114,000, which moves us into the zone of professionals and managers. The people above this threshold, the top 10%, control approximately half of the country's total income. I'm going to move on now because I want to get to the line demarcating the now famous 1%, the households making at least $394,000. This translates to a height of almost 32 feet. And now it gets a bit scary. We're in the last 30 seconds of the parade, and we're seeing real King Kongs, truly towering figures. At the threshold for the top 0.01%, the figures are over 827 feet tall, representing household incomes of over $10 million. And that's it. You've just seen the entire household income distribution in the U.S.
There's your graph. That's the graph of economic inequality in the United States of America. And if you look at this right here, for a family of 4 making $114,000 a year, that's the line for the top 10%, right there. I would say probably most people in this room are in this part of the category. But 90% of the United States of America live on less than that. Is this a just society? So what does poverty look like? We've been talking about that a little bit. That's a hard graph to see, to be honest with you. I'll never forget the first time I saw it. Largest percentage of people living in poverty. When you think about what poverty looks like in America, the largest percentage of people in America are children, 18 years old and under. In 2018, pre-COVID, we were at 16.82% of all children, almost 12 million kids living in poverty, 1 in every 6. COVID did something pretty fantastic for us. During COVID, child poverty dropped almost to unprecedented levels. And why did that happen? The federal government intervened, and childhood poverty dropped by over 10%. And as we roll back those measures, what's happening since then? You will see, I promise. There we go. It's doubled since last year as we've rolled back COVID provisions for children. Next year, we anticipate that poverty percentage being about the same as it was pre-COVID. Next largest group of people living in poverty in America. This is just for suspense. Senior adults. It's our grandparents and our babies. So when we think about who's living in poverty, what poverty looks like in the United States, it is children and it's senior adults. Now, the question is that the narrative of poverty that we have in America? Is that who we think of when we think of poverty in America? Or is there some other stereotypes? So what is the nature of rural poverty in general? This is something we deal with, that we face every day. Most of it is abandonment. It'll get there. There we go. In almost every major region of persistent rural poverty, Appalachia, Delta, up and down the Mississippi River, the Black Belt from Alabama to Southern Virginia, those huge regions of concentrated poverty is because some major industry has abandoned labor. The mechanization of farm labor put thousands and thousands and thousands of people without jobs. And I don't know, but I worked in fields as a kid in the Delta. Not too many people work in fields like we worked in fields, even in my own lifetime. But I wasn't big enough to do much on the fields. So the landowner who, we lived out on the place, so we lived out in the fields. My grandfather started as a sharecropper out there. When I was a kid, my only job, I could hold 2 sticks with flags on it. So what did I do? I flagged planes, right? So that's exactly right. And I was short enough, I was not in risk of catching some propeller. But I caught plenty of pesticide, herbicide, defoliant. The worst was the little white pellets of fertilizer, because that'll get down in your waist, and you sweat, and it blister your waist and all that stuff. So as that became mechanized, people lost their jobs, and if you worked in the field, you didn't save enough money for the next thing, so you were stuck there. Then in the 90s, the North American Free Trade Act happened, and manufacturing jobs abandoned labor. 30,000 jobs were lost in the Mississippi Delta alone due to the North American Free Trade Act. And I was a pastor in Connecticut for a long time, and we had a bunch of Fortune 100 people in our church, and we were down there, and he goes, "Now listen, NAFTA was good for America." And I said, "Hey, it was good for business. I don't know if it was good for America. Unless the Delta is not America, it wasn't good for the Delta." But a lot of people made a lot of money, but nobody here. So abandonment, manufacturing, reservations are a little bit different. This is forced migration or genocide. That's some of the causes of persistent rural poverty among reservations. So abandonment, and then just access. You live in an employment desert. When there are so this is called rural overpopulation. It's not that too many people live in rural space. It's just not enough jobs there for everybody who lives there to have a job. Not even like a well-paying job, just a job. And so what happens when people get abandoned and they end up living in places where there's rural overpopulation, the narrative turns against them, and they're the ones who are blamed for their own poverty. We created a system that created their situation, and now we blame them for their own poverty, the poverty that systems created. Food deserts, banking deserts, education deserts. Kids, when the consolidation of school districts happen, kids have to get bused forever to go to school. That's a fact. So we end up into this narrative of the deserving and the undeserving poor. And here's the narrative that I really want us to think about. Like, what is it? What do we mean when we say some people deserve our help and some people don't? And talk about undeserving. This is where we talk about the fat, lazy, sorry, don't want to work. Have you ever, raise your hand high if you've ever heard that narrative. Yeah, if you're awake, you're raising your hand, right? I know. Unemployment. If you don't have a job, that means you don't want to work. Not true. What else? What are some of the others? It's the narrative, like, oh, they've made bad decisions. That might be true. Raise your hand high if you've never made a bad decision. You're agreeing with the people who are asleep. Yeah, we all make bad decisions. But guess what? The consequences of me making a bad decision right now is fundamentally different than somebody who's working, an hourly wage, a minimum wage. They make a bad decision, they lose it all. So the idea of choice does matter. They abuse government programs. Who abuses government programs the most? Is it the poor? Where's the largest investment of government funds happening? Let's say Mississippi. Who's doing that? Is it all these poor people in the Delta? My parents? No, most government abuse happens at the top. What about these children out of wedlock? If they would just have kids out of wedlock, I want you to know what's devastating, and I hear this narrative a lot. What's truly devastating is if you are a young woman and you live in poverty, whether or not you have a kid is not a major indicator whether you get out of poverty or not, because your chances are so low in the first place. That's devastating. And then they're just not respectable. My wife worked at an at-risk high school in Norwalk, Connecticut. So let's not pick on the South anymore. Norwalk, Connecticut. And they had a woman in there doing a jobs program, and she was telling the young men, if you want a job, you got to pull your pants up. You can't be wearing those chains. You can't wear your hair that way. And girls, you can't be letting all that flop out and wear tight clothes. She just let them have it, right? And I told Pam, I said, well, she's telling those kids who are mostly black and brown, she's telling those kids, if you want a job in America, you better be white. Because your culture is not conducive to having a job in Norwalk, Connecticut. That's devastating. So Vaughn, I was talking about identity stuff and identity bias. Oh. But who deserves our help? Employed people who work hard. You know who works hard and are people who are employed? People in the Medicaid coverage gap, working 2 jobs and they don't have insurance through their employer, and they're not making enough to buy insurance, so they don't have insurance. And the fact that they work means they don't qualify for Medicaid. So there's this huge gap where all these hard-working people who deserve our help, maybe deserve Medicaid expansion so they can have health care. Oh, they make good decisions. They don't abuse, or they don't use. That's a big question mark, right? I mean, if we had our way, they wouldn't use it at all. No children out of wedlock, they're respectable. That's how we end up, making this line between who deserves help and who doesn't deserve help. Now, the big question for me, and I asked this the other day, who's in the position to start asking these questions? You can only start asking the question about who deserves it and who doesn't deserve it if you are in the seat of power. Poor people don't think like this because they're usually helping each other out. It's only people who are not in need, who are not on assistance, who are making these decisions about who deserves and who doesn't deserve our care. But I think that's probably the wrong question to be asking. So here's a video of one of our nonprofits in Alabama. Let's watch this video and ask who's deserving and undeserving.
Anytime people come to Perry County, nobody plans a vacation in Perry County. But when you come for events and activities like this, it's called creative tourism, is what I always say. We've been in this building for 13 years, and we're here to help the least of these. Some of the most common struggles are individuals just trying to make ends meet day to day, because many of our residents are trying to live out less than $800 a month. And you have at least a little bump in the road, and you get where your car tear up, or you have an unexpected illness. You can't pay your bills, and all of a sudden your lights are about to be turned off, or can't buy grocery because your food stamps have ran out, and so you don't have enough money for grocery. We had some individuals, because it was such a hardship on their family, they chose to quit having dialysis and just die. And those are hard choices that people make. We were doing the self-help housing program. One of the volunteers, she was actually volunteering with us. And she was talking, we were cleaning the bathroom and cleaning the house after it was complete. And she was talking about how pretty the bathroom was and how nice the bathroom was. And I said, yeah, it is real nice, but it was just a bathroom. It wasn't anything extra, it was just a bathroom. But she kept talking about it. Then she said, you think I could get one of these? I said, sure, Doris, you can get one. Just come down, you can fill out an application and we'll help you. And then when I filled out the application, when I went to her house, even though I had went and picked her up a number of times over the years, I had never gone in the house. I'd always just stop and pick her up. I didn't realize she didn't have inside plumbing. And that she had a water spigot in her yard. And that was what she had. She didn't have it inside. So for her, when we helped her to complete the self-help housing process for that, and then now she's a homeowner. And then she has a home with 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. And that was something that she didn't have. You know, things like that, you have a chance to help people to have a better quality of life. Help them to have hope. They know that there's a better way. When you look at the statistics and when you look at all of the issues and problems that they talk about, when you see the people, all of the statistics devolve away, move away.
I love Miss Frances Ford. That woman has saved people's lives. Now, the big question is, did she deserve that house? She had been helping build houses for over a decade with Miss Frances and did not have running water in her house. Who deserves our help? All right, I'm going to hurry up here. Somebody had something to say about that. Who deserves our help? Here's some more. Who deserves our help? Where's that lean, Chuck? Where's that lean? Who deserves our help? Who deserves our help? I mean, I'm not Methodist, but I am a Christian. Who deserves our help? It's the wrong question. It's not who deserves our help. That's the question. Do we care? Mississippi, big Christian Mississippi, super Baptist even Mississippi. Do we care? All right, I'm going to zoom through now. If yes, we will act. We probably already are. How do we take action? Come on. So what we do, a lot of interventions, after-school programs, food programs, all that is intervening in a system that creates poverty, intervening in an educational system that's been created to fail. Right? We're intervening to do tutoring programs. We're intervening in a system that starves our children in the summer times. So we do summer food programs. Those are interventions. Innovation's different. It's like, okay, how do we creatively think of new ways to do this? That's the innovation piece. We got some of that into Together for Hope. But advocacy is a big part of what we're moving to. Like, how do we change the system? How do we rewrite the laws so it can look different? Real population, 2.8 million people in Mississippi. Come on, go fast. How many live in poverty? 22.3% live below the federal poverty line. Is that a just society? If it would go faster, I'd have more time. In Mississippi, kids, there are 718,000 children in Mississippi. 31.3% of them live in poverty. If you're sitting at a table right now, look to your right and left. That's one of you lives in poverty if you're a child. Population of Hinds County, 236,000. A quarter of us live below the federal population, 60,000 people in Hinds County. Population under 18, we got 21,000 kids in our county. 30% of them, 6,300. Can we do something with 6,300? Now, and all that, out of the 1 million households in Mississippi, how many of them do you think get income from federal assistance? What percentage gets federal income, state aid, or aid from the federal government? How many? What percentage? Yell it out. Less than 10%. 5%. There you go. Do we live in a just society? Those are the numbers. Where are all the welfare queens? Like, what happens to the narrative when you actually look at the numbers in Mississippi? So here's our major advocacy work. I hope they all come up at once. Oh, good gracious. They won't. All right, so there's a lot of them. Come on. Yeah, I don't know if my battery's dead or what. But TANF, earned income tax. Okay, there we go. That one right there, we're going to get to that one. Expanded health care, remove a grocery tax, raise the minimum wage, educational outcomes, increase public transportation is a huge issue, FYI. 2 seconds with that. All right, so I'm glad American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network is here, yes. They've been working with a lot of religious leaders across the country to create these storytellings and look at like what the moral responsibility of expanding Medicaid and making sure, not even Medicaid, like access to health care, right? That's all we're talking about. It's a great video, and you'll see some familiar faces here. Maybe. Well, we'll have to find a way to show you that, but that's not, we're not hooked up to the internet right now. Yeah, that's too bad. Okay, all right. You're in it though. That's like you start the video and you're so good in this video. I wanted your whole congregation and outside of Jackson to see it. So, all right, let's see here. No. All right, we'll get there. Yeah, it's all right. And it's not even gonna, there we go. I'll just get to the last piece. Listen, what I want you guys to, I want you to join Together for Hope. I want you to sign on the dotted line. You can give to Together for Hope. You don't have to give Together for Hope. You don't even have to sign up, but you can be a poverty abolitionist, right? At some point during the enslavement of human beings in America, people stood up and said, that's wrong. And there were people who had Bible passages and said, no, it's not. But there was a whole movement of abolitionists that said, no, that is wrong. And we're looking for poverty abolitionists in the United States of America. There's a great book by Matthew Desmond right now, Poverty by America, where he talks about this, being a poverty abolitionist. And a big part of it is right here, this Walter Brueggemann quote. Yeah, there we go, this one right here. What I love about Brueggemann, he's talking about the wilderness, is the idea of imagination. Like, we talk about political will and political courage, but where's our political imagination? Where's our spiritual imagination? What stops us from thinking big and actually trying to go after it? I mean, if there's a lot of problems we have, it shouldn't be a problem of imagination. And that's something we all have that we can utilize. And I think imagination and hope get dangerously close to each other. So I'm over time. Thank you all so much. Thank you for everything.
My apologies that the internet did not run. We're going to try that again after lunch. It is a powerful video, and we want you to see it. So we're going to try to work on that over lunch. It is now time for our lunch break. I believe you were given a list of different restaurants that are open on Saturday in the close by Jackson area. And so we invite you to go eat lunch and be back here at 12:30 for our next session. Thank you so much.